Okay. Maybe I'll try to be focused as I can. Just could the ESB networks confirm whether all domestic customers who put up, for example, solar panels, etc., are guaranteed that they'll get a connection to the grid, along that they can find somebody to buy the electricity off them? Second question to Éamon. 10% of houses in the state do not have water supply from Éamon or from a high-quality group scheme. It's an amazing number, 10%. So they're dependent on private supplies, streams, wells, etc. My question is, would Éamon be supportive of a plan such as the fibre rollout, the broadband rollout, that would set about providing, as we did with electricity, as we're doing with fibre, water to every house and premises in the country? On the islands and the hill line, could you outline to me what plans Éamon have to generate a resilient water supply to all islands? For example, from early spring to late autumn, depending on the weather, Innisfree has perennial problems with water supply, and these have been going on year after year after year. You're bringing tankers of boats, tankers of water into the island. It's costing a fortune. Have you a plan to deal with that issue? And was consideration given, and this goes to a wider question that should involve the Department of the Islands, was consideration given to the feasibility of connecting the islands, the Aran Islands, to the mainland vis-a-vis a pipe that would be laid at the same time as you'd put in fibre and probably another electricity cable, a stronger one, and that would give you resilience in the case of a repeat of what happened before, where the cable got ripped up by a private operator. In relation to Boffin, Éamon have had a huge problem with the waters, and it's been out for a long, long time. This year wasn't as bad, but we need resilience on the islands. We're back now to the big question where I think the islands and Éamon interface. Sewage. On the islands, there is a tiny inherited scheme that you've inherited by accident, but by court case, because the EPA got involved. On Kilronan, it serviced 7 houses, and there's another bit of a scheme that was a private scheme, but serviced the public toilets that I understand you've now got responsibility for. But what I was wondering is, under the present regime, do you see any possibility of providing the whole of the village of Kilronan with wastewater service? And also under the island of Innisfree, which is a very high population for a very small island, are there any plans to provide a wastewater facility? And this is where the Islands Fund comes in. Would it change the Éamon attitude to getting on with these jobs, because we're back at the old cost-benefit analysis problem? If, for example, the Department of the Islands, as it did often with infrastructure in the past, came in and said, well, look, we'll provide, we'll say 50% of the cost, if you provide the other 50% of the cost, would that maybe encourage you to get on with this fundamental infrastructure? For the islands section, I'm just going through my questions here. For the island section, in the past, the Islands Fund was used for a myriad of infrastructure deficits. In fact, any infrastructure deficit that came our way, we just dealt with it. And samples of that were, for example, where the ESP networks were willing to put the distribution networks in the small islands, but the department funded the bill for the underwater cable, for the undersea cable to the island, from the point of the mainland to the point of the island. Now, of course, I'd like to see this done. I think in Gold Island, we did it water and electricity at the same time. And I'd be saying no, water, electricity, and put a fibre cable in, or ducting for it at least, in at the same time. So I'm wondering, is that kind of, how would I put it, adventurous spirit still alive in the Islands Division? Because otherwise, the national policies just don't work. because you're always at the bottom of the pile on the cost-benefit analysis, because your population is by definition constrained. The biggest island we have is, population-wise, is Inishmore, with a population of 800. Next biggest one is Ardenmore, fairly near to the mainland, 500. And then you're down to, I think, Innisir, with 300 people. So the island population is small. I have a question now for the Department of Community and Rural Development in relation to chlor funding. Because in the past, for sewage schemes, the chlor fund, so the chlor could combine with the island, but on both the mainland and on the islands, chlor funding for some sewage schemes was on a 50-50 basis. We never used it on the islands at the time. It wasn't a big pressure point. The money mainly went into piers. Electricity was done. But there was a scheme, and this relates to Irish Water on the mainland. At the moment, there's a scheme that the Department fund where they provide you with funding for wastewater systems in on-sewer towns and villages, and you provide them, isn't that correct? So what I'm wondering is this: the chlor areas tend to lose out on this. The small villages in the chlor areas in the islands lose out on this because they don't have again, back into the size of a Craughwell or of a Clarence Bridge or whatever. So what I'm wondering is, supposing the Department of Rural Development were to come in with a 50-50 fund for chlor areas, where they would 50-50 fund the provision of small sewage schemes in chlor areas specifically, which are the areas with 30% lost population since the foundation of the state, or since 1926. I was wondering, would that be seen as an attractive prospect to try and ensure that these small places sometime get scheme? Because as I said, I think we need to be disruptive here. I'm nearly finished, Chair. Yeah, I think I'm finished.
Yep, Councillor. All very small asks. Interesting though. I might put I suppose the points to Irish Water first. Yeah.
A number of points there in relation to Ishcairn, both water and wastewater. I suppose maybe I might start by setting out the terms in which we operate in the asset base that we cover, and I suppose the legislation that's been put in place for the establishment of Ishcairn. We, based on, I suppose, the rules, if you like, under which we operate, we can only invest in public assets that have been vested to us by the Minister. And where assets don't exist or public assets don't exist, it's not within our remit to invest capital expenditure on those areas.
But you do build out to, if certain land gets owned, you do build out.
As part of an extension of an existing agglomeration.
Yeah, but you're still building out.
And that, a lot of that extension of the network is being covered through dedicated growth programs such as the LIAF and MUDs, which are being provided by the department.
So you can build out, sometimes with your own money and sometimes with department money. So you could build out a water scheme.
I suppose in terms of the water scheme, I'll hand over to Des to talk
yeah. Okay, this is just wastewater.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I suppose the bigger area, I suppose, in terms of this conversation, in my mind, is the unserviced areas, the unsewered settlements and villages that currently don't have a wastewater network, or they may have a combination of private developments, such as the DPI mentioned earlier, and those areas are I suppose they're in focus from the Department of Housing, Local Government and Heritage perspective. We referenced there the Measure 8 of the Rural Water Programme, which the Department administer. The local authorities would have applied to the department for funding to establish new sewers where they didn't exist before in villages and treatment plants. Okay. So we are supportive of that, and when the funding is put through, we have committed to take those on, as we have discussed previously. And I think in any scenario where similar to what was mentioned previously about taking in charge in the group schemes, where assets are at a certain condition and meet certain standards, then the taking in charge and the taking responsibility for those has been part of the process we've been following in recent years. So I wouldn't see a big concern in terms of that approach. You mentioned about the wastewater system in Kilronan, and I can address that here today also. There is a small wastewater system treating wastewater from a small number of houses currently on the outskirts of the village of Kilronan, and we continue to operate that, and we have recently carried out maintenance on that to improve its performance. It only covers those small number of houses. As you've mentioned, then there's a separate system within the village itself which is servicing the public toilets, and we believe 1 or 2 properties also. We have taken that on in terms of a project. We are moving through stage 1 of the project of a 4-stage process where we look at all the potential viable options, and then we start the process of assessing those options and doing an appraisal to ensure that the most appropriate option is picked. There's obviously going to be a lot of complexities in relation to getting that project to the end, not least in terms of how much it will cost. It will be very expensive. We would confirm that, but also in terms of land availability, whether it's groundwater discharge, for example, whether we need a long sea outfall, and then we're into the whole marine area consenting piece and all of that type of thing. So there's quite a road to travel in that, but we have started that process.
But you're in the lower part of the village, you're in a very microscopic part of what's a reasonably conglomerated settlement.
Yeah.
Would it help the job considerably if there was a 50-50 offer from the Department of the Islands to encourage you to along the road? I mean, just being pragmatic about it, because you'd sell it to your bosses.
Yeah, for sure, but I think we have a commitment made in terms of addressing this specific issue. I think where the challenge will come ultimately is...
No, but I'm talking about doing a proper... If those 2 little micro schemes hadn't been there, you'd be telling me no dice.
I suppose I'd be directing down the rural water programme route, correct?
Okay, you have the schemes, but as I said, they're microscopic compared to the size of the village. They're legacy issues that you've got by court case and all sorts of things. So what I'm putting it, because obviously we'll be expecting the department, getting money to go in and do it as if you were told, put a new sewer in Kilronan, is going to take considerable money. Whereas just upgrading what you have would be a lot less money. Would a little present be a help on the way to encourage you to?
What I'd say on it is that the practice of extending sewers out roads at the edges of an agglomeration, it isn't something we do, generally speaking, unless there's a connection request piece in it.
I don't know if you know Kilronan.
I've been there in the recent past. Well, not the recent past, but yes.
But basically, the schemes are on the edge of the village.
Yeah.
The centre of the village doesn't have sewage. That's the irony of it. It's perverse, but that's the way it happened because of historic reasons.
Yeah.
So we're not talking about stretching halfway across to Manchester or to Killeen or Renton. We're talking about doing the core of the village and around it, which is quite agglomerated, but which is not the part that's sewered at the moment.
That's correct. Yeah.
We might come back to you again that another day because I don't want to hold up the meeting. Thanks for the information. I think you see where I'm coming from.
No, I do indeed.
So, my experience is it all comes down to money in the end.
Just one or two more items on the water side.
Mr. Nicholson,
Deputy, just in relation to your suggestion on the broadband. So, if government policy changes and we're asked to participate in the scheme, I'm sure that can happen. But in terms of extending networks into unpiped areas, like at this moment in time, the community water scheme entity of the rural water was set up to address that. Now, they then come to ourselves as Scairn for a connection. There's a good example of kind of joined up thinking in terms of the project that's currently about to start construction at Murrisk. So between Westport and Louisburgh, you have 22 kilometres of an area that has no pipe supply at all, which many people will find hard to believe. So the community have got together and they've requested a community water scheme. They have sought permission from Scairn for water, which we will provide them with, and we'll increase the capacity of Loch Mass to supply them. But in addition to that, Scairn are going to look to increase the pipe size through the community water scheme so that we can rationalise Louisburgh, which is at the end of the line. So that's a good model of.
Yeah, we did that in Commerce years ago.
Yeah, so that's a good model. In terms of your question on the islands and that, and we spoke about this back in June when we were in the Gaeltacht GRC, we have, at the moment our focus is, there's 11 islands that have their own supply on the island, and we carried out in National Water Resources a 25-year study, and you know that kind of told us in terms of the challenges for providing water on those islands. So the three Aran Islands, Inishboffin and Whitty Island in Cork are being advanced as a feasibility study in terms of the to determine what the best solution is there. And again, you know, I'm sure we will be in contact with our ESB network colleagues in terms of the undersea pipeline option, because that will be considered along with other options around desalination and raw water storage, etc. So that is moving ahead. It'll take a couple of years to determine, but that's where we're at with that.
That's great news.
Thank you.
ESB network.
Nicholson.
There was one question to ESB network.
Yeah, well, I'll come back to them, but just Mr. Nicholson. Okay.
Thanks, Deputy, and I'll just add the caveat before I start. I'm speaking to overall rural policy, and just a caution that I'm perhaps getting into the area of the line responsibility of other departments. So just to add that caveat at the start. Maybe just an anecdote. I live 2 kilometres up in Allboreen myself, and I was extremely happy to be able to get a grant to cover the full cost of water facilities off Limerick County Council with very little bureaucracy, and I know
that's one-off house.
One-off house, yeah.
The Limerick County Council gave you a grant.
Yeah.
Jeez, I wish
for water
in Limerick,
and filtration. Yeah. With very little bureaucracy, so as I say, I was quite happy with that. But just in terms of the overall policy approach, in terms of housing, so I know somewhere around 25% of all homes are one-off housing. Not dividing that by urban one-off and rural one-off, but we do know the majority of homes built in rural communities aren't developer-led and are one-off. In terms of the supports that are available to those, irrespective, you're talking about some sort of subvention, irrespective of the department, let's say, that would be parent to it. There's various grants there at the moment in terms of delivering housing, of course, like Help to Build, Help to Buy, First Home, septic tanks and so on.
No septic tank grant.
I would say, sorry, digging a well, the one I just referred to. I suppose I'd say in terms of developing any new scheme, any scheme which seeks to provide some sort of selective advantage or address a particular disadvantage obviously needs to be particularly carefully calibrated in terms of income levels of the households who might benefit from it and the geographic.
Coming from D4, I never saw an income calibration being done on a new wastewater supply in Dublin.
In terms of somebody who's going to benefit from an intervention that another household won't, needs to be carefully calibrated. And obviously colleagues in the...
Sorry, like I only suggested public infrastructure, I never didn't supply.
Yeah, but presumably public infrastructure that would benefit a particular community in terms of having to pay service, that likes the service charges and so on, and development levies and that kind of issue.
No, but we were talking about putting a public pipe under a public road.
Yeah, which is subvented by the state. So the issue I'm saying is any funding, irrespective of whether it's the Department of Rural Community Development or the Department of Housing, would need to be carefully calibrated and thought about what it's trying to achieve. In terms of the funds that are available to the Department of Rural and Community Development at the moment, you mentioned CLAR, that is a flexible enough fund. It's relatively small in relation to the overall amounts.
How small is it?
It's
8
million for 2023.
8 million?
8 million. And that provides obviously supports. It is flexible, it provides supports in terms of sports facilities.
Would you not be able to get back to where you were at about 20 million?
So, as I say, it's 8 million for 2023. In the overall scope of things, in terms of the department's funding and its capability of investing in infrastructure is hugely expensive. It's generally dealt with through the line department, with good reason, because the line department has specific expertise and intelligence in the area of utilities. So obviously, in terms of public policy and the way rural policy is operated at the moment, line departments generally take responsibility for the funding that's provided for particular infrastructure that's put in place.
Surely the role of the rural development party is to be, as I described it earlier, disruptive of of the approach that's vertical in the state, that the whole idea of a crossing department was to come across all the anomalies that the vertical construction of the state gets,
Yes,
and creates totally wasteful resource use by having all these schools and all these facilities and communities who just love to have more people, don't need massive new housing schemes or whatever in them, and need a little bit of investment. And my understanding of the rural development department was to be disruptive in this and put in the lateral money rather than the vertical money.
And I would believe and argue that it is disruptive, and it has funds available to do particular initiatives.
It hasn't much in infrastructure recently.
Which it does well. Well, it has the...
It's more town infrastructure, but not rural infrastructure. Sorry.
Yes, indeed. And again, there would be good reason for the policy position that's being taken to allow the parent departments who are responsible for the likes of broadband, wastewater infrastructure, water infrastructure and electricity to hold line responsibility for that because of the capital cost that's associated with it and because of the expertise that is required to oversee that. So personally, without having any particular kind of policy proposal in front of us, I would be cautious about taking that remit outside of the parent department in terms of the amount of funds that are associated with it. You wouldn't be able to do it for small money.
I didn't suggest that, because what I was suggesting is you use everybody else's expertise, but you just put in side funding. So I'll give you examples. We had a scheme going where the county council put in a new wastewater. So we went 50-50. We had no technical input. We left that to the parent department. We had a scheme under the group water schemes, as it was known at the time. I think they're called community connection schemes or something nowadays. And basically, we topped up the grant from the Department of Housing Environment at the time. And we made sure that the household didn't have to pay more than €1,200 for a water connection. So, but we didn't have any involvement as a department when those schemes were going. The department had no involvement in the technical spec. That was for the county council and the Department of. So, same thing with health facilities, same thing. Everything was done on the basis that you left the parent department with the job, the technical job. All you had to do was provide the money. So that was awful easy. And it was done there was no problem in doing it. It was done. If you check out the models that were operating from, I think it was 2000 on to 2010, you'll see that there was very little technical. ESB, we provided 100% grant where they had a business to networks to change from single phase to three phase. Very successful program, of course. It made it much more resilient. You were talking about resilience. It made the lines more resilient because they all got upgraded at the time, and it was very effective. So it has been done. The model's there. Maybe what we could do is we could have a further discussion on this. You can check the models that were operating, and then we can go back and have a discussion on this.
So I suppose I'd just close in saying this. I'm shooting a little bit blind, obviously, because I haven't or seen a policy proposal in terms of what's envisaged, the scope of it and the relative cost. I suppose my main point would be, if there is any proposal around a scheme which has a significant capital cost to it, and I don't know what that is, my gut, without having seen anything, would be that it stays with the parent department for a good reason. If it's talking about some sort of discretionary fund, obviously the Department of Rural Affairs regularly reviews the uses of its funds on a yearly basis almost. So anything would be considered in that context in terms of a formal submission and so on. And I think the Minister indicated a couple of weeks ago in the JOC here that those considerations could be done, but presumably it needs some sort of formal policy proposal.
Thanks very much. Mr. Tarrant.
Yes, I'm just coming back, Deputy, on the question to do with microgen for rooftops. So just to say a little bit more about this, we're at 76,000 customers now have registered under this scheme. We've seen massive growth in the last 12 months for microgeneration for rooftop solar. It's up about 85%. And just to say a little bit around the process, what customers do when they have an installer install solar PV panels, they submit a form to us called an NC6 form. And what that does is it demonstrates that the equipment has been installed by a registered installer. Once that form is processed, and it's done on what's called an inform and fit basis, so it's automated then by us, and the details are provided then to the electricity supply company who the customer has a relationship with, so that they get a customer, they get a credit for the export from those solar panels. And of course, look, that dovetails then as well with our smart metering program, because with the smart meters now, and at this stage we've installed over 1.5 million of them, you're able to see your usage and your export out to the distribution network. And in terms of any restrictions, there are no restrictions as things stand. Now, if you were to fast forward around the scale of this, and I think this does have the potential to be a big contributor towards the climate action targets, and it gives, you know, more control around use, obviously, and self-generation for customers. But as this scales up over the years ahead and it's continuing to grow at a huge pace, we are monitoring the network as well at low voltage level to see where we do need to invest on a proactive basis and also on a reactive basis. So as things stand, it is on an informed and fit basis, so there's no restrictions on people putting in solar panels.
Thanks very much. Senator Paddy.
Yeah, thanks, I'd like to welcome all the witnesses, and this has been...
Mar Luan Tara Humphrey Norwegian show couple of seachtain hin faoi scéim clár go bhfuiltí sin úsáid beidir le tuile airgid á amachchas na ranna atá freigrach is dóigh go bheith muid beidir go bhfuiltí an cur chuig chéanna úsáid mar bhainne leis an airgid capital atá an donna hill faoi láthair agus le cúpla bliana nuas is ar na bóithre agus ar céimh níos mar sin go príomha a bhí an bhéim stoi bhí laidú tací haar blianta ar an muisce capital a heis beidir demlíon ó 5 bliana dé go hin nuair bhí na hypergeile bhí tú a caint ar ag tarlú so is cinnte le cúpla bliana nuas gur an bhéim churtha ar na mion hyperge leis na cóirlaí chunde ach go háirithe ach le rá blian nó 3 bliana nuas mar sin tá glóir éisteachta dinta an san airforte go na mara agus sna airforte ar na Hill cumach céanna so táidig ag brandhfuir na inis agus an policy fáil sé an céine na hátaí eile agus céine deisna eile agus mar Luan Tara má tá deis an target tá agan na úsáid chun spre go hórsta de ranna eile a gcuid dul go si a cholína agus techt an cín leis céimní ba muáasta leabhartlób agus fécinn tar an fleannaí atáúp agus sin.
Híle mar ranna
just to check to my féidir bheith garglamar tá private session going fresh.
Híle mar ranna na Nílein. Gomach sibse ar a tála a fáil na bhaibhinaí as a gail ní fannacht a go gail ag na heagri seile ará tá naimtre le hiiscans na naimtre le séireachas. Cahar é réiteach seo é méid a tá muintí sásta chuisteach sa bota. Naimtre le fysiiciúla sláinteach mar sin de. Agus in sin gomach sibse a gail ag na heagri a teiriscint teach sa fan go deachtaí siúdaid. Mar níl mar thosaíocht a go siú, tá sé mar chéad tosaíocht a go se ranach na Nílein. Agus sin difir fecardom sa tá, ar nóid trhád is tú airigid a go. A cahan teirigid bhéadúach, ní airigid mór a gaiid, amach 5 milliún som líana go bheach se bh déanna táil leog. Agus chlódach se chuilhort agus céimní is chuilhort. Agus testin inéisteach mar sin ar na Hilein. Má tá muid a gaid a cuineil pobl inmharna búan ar na Hilein. Testó cineal inéisteach mar sin.
Cinnte agus nóra bhí an cordachán arsúla an don policy hómas chuig na ranna agsúla i ggéire cinnú go médís páirteach anis sa broses agus sa policy mar hálín ba on céad criniú don chusta monitorachta don policy an amárach agus as seo amach baimint ag go leis chuig na ranna agus chuig na hagrirt eile leis na héileh sinna tá teachtal na Hill fécinn inis an cinnte rud go gurfar a bhaim rud aigen. Gurmad.